So sometimes in politics, you got to learn it's about integrity. It's not about who's a Republican or who's a Democrat. It's just about integrity. And one person who had no integrity was George Santos, who was a pathological liar, who was a criminal who got off by Donald Trump. But now for a lot of people who are anti-George Santos from the left and the right, they should be knowing he still might be going to jail. For George Santos, the man is a serial liar. There's no defense to it. He lied that his family were Holocaust survivors and he was actually part Jewish to try and appeal to Jewish voters. He lied that his mom died due to illnesses related to 9/11 when she wasn't even living in the country at the time. He lied that he went to NYU. He lied that he went to Baruch. He lied that he was a champion volleyball player who defeated the Harvard team. He lied that he worked for JP Morgan. He lied about his entire life. And to make it worse, he's a clear criminal. During COVID, when people were struggling to pay for things and he had a job, he applied for unemployment benefits and was making money. He used donors' information to apply for credit cards so he can spend money on himself while he was putting his donors in debt. And also at the same time, he took donor money that was supposed to go to the campaign and he bought Armani suits with it. He also paid off his own personal credit card debts and he even used some of the money to pay for an OnlyFans account. Even though George Santos was sentenced to go to prison, Donald Trump opted to give him a pardon, really just due to loyalty to the Republican Party, where Donald Trump has pardoned 1,600 people so far, and some of them I do think are good, like the Ross Ulbricht pardon, but some of them are really bad, like this one with George Santos. But even though this matters in the short term, it might not matter in the long term, because what's going to haunt George Santos is a pardon can only apply to federal crimes, and now he has prosecutors in Nassau County looking to send him to jail. Probably the biggest example of limitations to a presidential pardon when it comes to federal versus local was in 1960 with Georgia, when Martin Luther King was arrested and sentenced to 4 months in a work camp. This punishment was happening during a time when John F. Kennedy was just elected to office and Robert F. Kennedy was put in charge of the justice system, so they actually were exploring trying to do some sort of pardon, but they ultimately couldn't because it was considered local policy, so Martin Luther King did have to deal with his sentence, even though John F. Kennedy tried to make things lighter for him. Now where this is a big deal for George Santos is 87% of people who are in prison in the United States are in prison for state or local penalties. Only 13% are there under federal law, so George Santos could join that 87% if Nassau County does find something, but there is still one thing that gives George Santos a benefit. Benefit for George Santos is technically a person cannot go to prison for the same crime twice. He cannot be tried. And that was actually Jeffrey Epstein's big defense, because he did go to jail in the 2000s, even though he was given an extremely light sentence. But when he was in jail in the late 2010s, his whole defense was, oh, I already went to jail for this in the 2000s. What Nassau County has to do now is find something completely new for George Santos, which is probably not that hard looking at how many crimes he was able to commit with just a little bit of research, and at the same time have to make the argument that it's a state or local offense and not a federal offense, so this way George Santos can go to prison. But with that, this is Red, Blue, and You. I'm your host, Charles Perala. Please subscribe to learn something.